Alright, welcome back to a new TouchDesigner tutorial. And in this one I've got a real treat for you. And we're going to be working with a grid just in tops, and we're going to be working with both offsetting every individual tile and scaling them. So we have this really cool system here set up where we can have any kind of input here. So right now it's just a circle, can be a banana, can be a portrait, can also be a video, can also be, any texture. So also video input, like live video input. And we can also manipulate it by any texture. So it can be manipulated by noise, the offset here. It can be manipulated by me, if you want to invite me to your home to manipulate your textures. Yeah, no, it can be manipulated by video input here. So I'm using just a silhouette with any video background, and then it can also be manipulated, for example, by just an animation like this. Yeah, then we also have scaling going on here. So if I were to turn this off, you can see it's really just the circle being copied into a grid and then being offset. It's also really funky. So again, we can change back to our noise, can make it less strong. And yeah, we could also, for example, turn off the repeat here. So change that to 0. And now if we go up with our period, you can really nicely see how the offsetting is going on here. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you how this is done now. And so let's get started. So as usual, I will delete everything and start from scratch with you together. Right, so I'm gonna start with a constant, kind of like Paqueta 12, and this is definitely kind of inspired or based on a technique that I will also share in the description. So I'm gonna change this to like grid, to res and grid. So for resolution, I'm gonna work with 1280 by 1280. We're gonna work in squares, so it's gonna be 2 times that. And then the grid, I'm gonna start with a 12 by 12 grid. Then I'm gonna add a ramp top here. And on this ramp, I'm gonna change my pixel format to 32-bit float mono. And my resolution, I want that to be this resolution I've specified here. Alright, I don't really need to do any more here. I'm just gonna add a reorder as well as a flip. On my flip, I'm gonna change flop to bottom left and then input that as a second input in my reorder. Change output green to input 2, go to comment page and change this to 32-bit float RG. So we have this really nice UV gradient here. Alright, so I'm gonna quickly explain you the remap top that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to just start with a ramp as an example. I'm going to use my resolution on here, change this to 32-bit float RGB. This is really just for the example. Alright, so I'm going to add a remap top to this and add my reorder here as a second input. Basically, it looks like nothing is happening. But that's because our UV map here is perfectly going from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So we have 0, 0 here, x and y being 0, 0, and here we have 1 and 1. So the sampling, so basically it's kind of like this remap top is sampling from this image based on this image, or warping, or whatever you want to call it. So let me just show you with an example. I think that's the best way to explain it. So if we add a transform and go down for a scale to like 0.5, so now we pushed like our sampling base into the center. We just made it smaller. So that means whatever we're sampling, so this ramp is gonna be smaller as well. If I now were to distort my scale of this transform to make that bigger, it's gonna do the same thing with my input there. And now if I were to use the tiling here, change it to repeat, it's gonna again do the same thing to my texture here. And we're really gonna make use of that. I hope that makes sense. So I'm gonna get rid of my ramp. We're not actually gonna be working with a ramp. I think it's just good to show. I'm gonna add a circle here instead. And on my circle, I'm gonna change my resolution again and change my pixel format to 32-bit float RGB. And I'm gonna use that now as a first input. And now we can already see that's being put into a grid, like we're doing here in the transform. So right now the grid isn't perfect, so I'm gonna, like it's offset by 0.5 because of this pivot. So I'm just gonna set both of these to 0. Now you can see we have a perfect grid. If Right now it's 2 by 2 because we changed the scale to 0.5. So what we want to do is use our grid value here on the scale and do like 1 divided by that value. So now we have a nice 12 by 12 grid, and that's being sort of copied over into here, or our circle is being manipulated in that way too. Cool, so I'm just going to add a null and call it BG as always and display that. So I've turned off display backdrop tops so we can nicely see that here and not here in the background. Sweet, so this is really a good start. I'm going to add this remap to the very end here actually, because we're going to do a bunch of things to this sampling map to manipulate our circles. So we're going to be starting with offsetting. So we have basically two options generally. One is to offset in any direction, and the other is to scale any tile in any way. Cool, so for the offset, I'm going to start with a noise. And I'm going to change that pixel format again to 32-bit float RGB, and I'm going to use my resolution again. And I'm going to change a few values here. So first off, I'm going to change my period to like 2, and the harmonics to 1. Might want to change the seed. I'm going to leave monochrome on actually. And then I'm going to add a composite here, so just to show you what's happening now. So I'm going to add that in here and change my operation to add. All right, so that's looking kind of weird. So first off, what we might want to do is go down with our offset. So you can see the higher I go with the offset, the more it's going to be, well, offset. So we want to actually change that to 0. So now if we go up with the amplitude, you can see this is also looking pretty funky. But the thing is, it's always just going like diagonally to bottom left and top right. That's because we only have black and white. We only have basically one channel or 3 channels that are all the same value. And we want RNG to be 2 different values. Actually, this just needs to be RG. So to do that, I can turn off monochrome. So now we can see we have a nice RNG channel. And now if I go up with my amplitude up and down, you can see there it's being displaced in all directions. Cool, so if I change the seed now, you can see that works. Well, but it's not truly what we're going for, because now you can see the circle is being warped, so that is a cool effect, but I don't want to go for that. So I can add a limit, and basically what I want to do is put whatever data I have here into a grid as well. So I can use my grid on the quantize, to first turn on round here. You can already see it's kind of working. Being put into a grid. Now I can use that in here. Again, do 1 divided by that. And now we can copy this parameter, paste the reference, and then divide that by 2. And now we can see it works nicely. So if I were to animate this, ABS time.seconds times point whatever, we can now, if we go up with the period to maybe 5, we can see every circle is being offset in different directions, which looks really nice. So the lower we go with the period, the more random it's going to be, as always. Now every circle is just going to be pushed off its little tile here. So if I were to add a math here and go up with the multiplication to maybe 3, you can see they're often being pushed off so far that we just see the black background. So you might want that. I mean, it looks cool, but if you don't want that, what you could do is change the extend here to repeat. And now basically it's going to repeat this texture and sort of create this another grid inside of a grid, which is kind of cool. Yeah, so that's basically it. Thanks for watching. No. The next step here would be to test out different inputs. So right now we have circle. Let's go back to 0 and let's just bypass the math so it's not as strong, the offsetting. And I'm just going to add a switch after the circle so we can nicely switch between inputs. And I'm also going to add a fit actually. So the fit is not going to be necessary for the circle, but we're going to add movie file ins here now. So we always want to have the same resolution. So I'm going to just use my res on here again, change the pixel format to 32-bit float RGB, on my fit, I also want to change fit to outside. I'm going to use a movie file in now. And I'm just going to go with the banana, put that in here. And now we can see our banana is nicely being offset. So again, we could turn off the limit here. And now if we go down with this, you can see it's being warped, which is also really interesting with the banana. But yeah, we might want to have a grid. I'm just going to do, actually, I'm just going to copy it from my other project. Another, like a portrait, put that in here. And that's also kind of nice. It also works well with filled images. So, you know, not like a transparent or black background. So just have a filled image. In this case, it might be even nice to change the extend to hold or to repeat again, whatever you think works best. Might want to make this stronger again. So it kind of looks like this glass or something like that. I don't know. So let's look at different ways of manipulating and offsetting our texture. So one of them is using a video device in. I'm going to change it to 32 Hertz, so it's a bit smoother. So there you can see me. I'm going to add a flip and flip X, so it's not mirrored. You could also just turn it to monochrome, so you could use a monochrome top or an HSV adjust, go down to saturation. But I think it's nicer if we just have the silhouette. And for that, I'm going to use an NVIDIA background. This only works on NVIDIA GPUs though. You could also use a Kinect, however, which also only works on Windows. So, so sorry, Mac people. I'm going to use a blur on this, a quite strong one, like 5 and 25. So we have not a hard cut edge, but like a smooth edge. And then I'm going to add another switch here and put that input into here, change that to index 1. And you can see a problem now, that problem being that we don't have the right resolution and the right pixel format. So again, we could just copy this fit here and put that here and here. And now we already changed the pixel format here. So you can see it works pretty nicely now. But you can really only see the outlines. And I blurred them because if I don't, you can see it looks kind of bad. But I think a good trick to work here is we already have this noise, is we can use a composite. Put that noise into here. Let's change the transform to input 1. We've got to change the pixel format to 32-bit float RGB. Now it looks a lot more interesting because the noise is happening inside of my silhouette. So this is what it looks like without the blur. And you can see it looks a lot smoother with the blur. So that's why I added that. I think it's really fun. All right, let me show you a third option here. So I'm just going to move this up a bit. I'm going to add a circle top. Again, we want to have the same resolution. Pixel format, I can just leave. It doesn't really matter because we're changing it here. I'm going to go down from a radius to 0.1. And I want to rotate that in a circle. I want to rotate this circle in a circle. So to create that movement, I'm going to add an LFO. I'm just going to call it TX here and copy it, call it TY here. And change the amplitude to 0.3. And on my second one, I want to change the phase to 0.2. So we basically have a cosine. I'm going to add a merge. Okay, now let's just call this circle pause to be clean. And use TX on center X and TY on center Y. So now it looks kind of weird, kind of like an ellipse. And we can just select both of LFOs and click poles. So they're being reset at the same time. So we have a perfect circle. You might want to add a feedback here. I'm just going to be lazy and add a pre-made feedback from my palette. It's really just a normal feedback loop. I think we've done that enough times. Just going to press 1. We have a nice feedback here. Cool. I'm just going to copy this comp. Use this as a first input or second input, doesn't matter. So again, we might just want to take the circle. So it looks like this. We might also want to just use this. Looks a lot better. I think it adds more dynamics into the mix. So using the noise as a multiplication for multiplication for the circle, right? It's really funky. Again, we could go up with the strength here quite high, maybe 10, think that looks really cool. Very, very dynamic. Nice. So you can use any other thing in here. Just make sure it's the right resolution and pixel format. And it works best if it's colored, actually, because it's going to be offsetting in all directions. If it's black and white, it's just going to be diagonal. All right, so I'm just going to bypass this, and we're going to be working on the multiplication now, so the scaling. So for that, I'm going to add another noise. It's always good to use noise to show things. I'm just going to go up of my period to 2. Again, I'm going to use my resolution. And pixel format is going to be 32-bit float RG. Because we just need a red and green channel. Alright, so then I'm going to add a null to this. Because I want to change the input maybe later on. And then I'm going to add a limit to this. Just quickly bypass it for now. And after this comp, I'm going to add another comp. And leave this one like the operation at multiply. And I'm just going to put that in here. Cool, so that's looking very strange. So first off, what we might want to do is actually, let's get rid of this grid limit and just copy the limit from up here because it's already set up in the way that we want. That setup being that we divide the grid by like 1 divided by this grid size. And now we can see that's already looking better. Again, bugs, but it looks weirdly offset. So to counter that, I found a way, which is just adding a math here and changing the multiplication to 8. And don't ask me why, please. Let's just do it. On my limit here, because you can see like the heads are sometimes turned, so that might be something that you want. It's not what I want, so I can go to limit and just check positive only, and then they're all rotated in the right way. I'm going to go back to the circle here because I can see nicely here that the grid isn't perfect yet. So again, I found a way to do that, to make it perfect. And that's just adding the quantized value of round here, and then changing the value step to 1 divided by 8. So here we're multiplying by 8, and here we're dividing by 8. So you might think it works if you just bypass both, but it doesn't. So just do what I tell you. Don't question it. Well, anyways, so we're basically already there. Let's quickly set up our noise so we have different seeds. We could just animate it as we did here with apps time at seconds, but what I'd rather like to do here is, because that's going to be kind of flickery, is to add an LFO again. Change that type to pulse. Maybe let's go down frequency to 0.5. So every 2 seconds it's going to be hitting. And then we can add a count here, as well as a now. And then we can use this, let's just call it seed. You can use it on here. Let's just do 0, channel 0. So every 2 seconds we have a different noise. Sweet and simple. All right, so just gonna, they kind of belong together. I'm just gonna push this a bit over here, and we can now make the grid a bit more interesting by adding a composite. Changing this to add, and now we can just copy this limit twice. And so on the first one, I'm gonna do, actually, just leave that, put that in here. And now I can change the position steps, like here to 2, and maybe here to 3. And now we can go down for noise offset to like 0.2. Like anything you want, really. It's going to affect it quite a lot, as you can see. And now we have some more variation in there. I think that looks really interesting. Again, we can change our image, maybe to banana, or to this portrait. And the funny thing is, fun thing, it's not very funny. You can offset and multiply it now at the same time. And I think that's just a really cool generative artwork. All right, so another thing we can check out here is how to manipulate the scale in other ways. So we can push this over here. Let's just add another switch. And we can use a select top. And then we can grab first, let's just grab this blur. And then we can just copy this fit. Put that in here. And then we can put that in the switch and change the index to 1. And now our scale is based on our silhouette. And we could also just grab our switch here, and then it's going to be with the noise as well. So now the problem is though that our noise is RNG, so the scaling is not going to be in the 1:1 aspect ratio. So to counter that, what we could do here, if you don't want this to happen, is to add an HSV adjust and simply go down with the saturation multiplier, or another way would be to just add a monochrome in front of the fit. So both works perfectly, and it's a lot of fun to play around with. One other thing here might be that you don't want the background to be completely black, so you might want to add a level. You could also do this with a math, but you could just change the outload to like 0.2 or maybe 0.1, something like that, so the scaling isn't 0 in the background. And of course you could also add any other texture, like any kind of movie file in, or you know, anything that you like. One thing you can also do is, for example, just bypass this third limit. So we have two like sort of grids going on, and then one just like noise without the grid. I think that looks really funky as well. Also with the circles, right? The bananas looks kind of weird. So that's really cool too. And is there anything else I wanted to show? What happens when I rotate this grid? You can rotate the grid as well. You could technically rotate any of these grids if your transform is set to repeat. Again, we could change our extend here to 0. So maybe let's turn this on again. Obviously we can go here and change the grid size. So maybe 20, or it could even just be 2. So maybe if we turn this off, or like 4 maybe. So it's 4x4 grid. You can go down with the period here to make it more random, or the offset up and down. You can add harmonics, whatever you please. We can go back here to just noise. Maybe go to like 16x16. Yeah. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm looking forward to seeing some cool artworks on all kinds of social media. So feel free to tag me at Electronaut. And thanks a lot to all the patrons supporting me. Without you guys, it would not be possible. So thanks a lot, and I will see you on the next video.